JJ the CPA here. Hope you're doing well. So the Paycheck Protection Program forgiveness application, Form 3508S, for those that got less than $150,000. This video, though, is for those that would have gotten the least amount of really anybody who got PPP, which is my fellow self-employed taxpayers, small business owner, gig workers, those that filed Schedule C or Schedule F. So the reason I'm saying that is that there are special rules for those that got $50,000 or less. No special form, because you still file Form 3508S. But if you got $50,000 or less, you don't have to provide any documentation. Now, the bank may ask for it. Great, provide it. But here's the thing. For self-employed, Schedule C, Schedule F, it is very simple for you. The first thing I want you to know is this. You don't have payroll. You're not an employee unless you have employees that you paid W-2s to. And if you did, then this video is not covering what you might have questions on. This video is for those that are self-employed that do not have employees. And when you pay someone on a 1099, that is not an employee. An employee is somebody that you would pay and they get a Form W-2. So back to you, self-employed. You're not an employee. I'm going to give you a link to the IRS website and more notably the instructions specific with Schedule C that indicate that you are not an employee by law. You can't be an employee. You can't consider yourself an employee. It doesn't matter if you say you're giving yourself payroll every week or every other week. It's not payroll in the eyes of the IRS. Just because you call it payroll doesn't mean it's payroll. All it is money that you're, in essence, giving yourself from the net of your business. It's not payroll because payroll is only if you've paid yourself Form W-2, and you can't. The IRS says it. Clear as day. I'll give you a link to that and tell you where to even go and look, page number and the section. I'm also going to give you a link to the SBA website and more specifically to the FAQ that the SBA has put out that has specifically said for the self-employed, here's what it is that you do to determine your forgiveness of the PPP. And it's very simple. It is the line 31 of Schedule C divided by 12 times 2.5. It sounds familiar, doesn't it? Because that's the same calculation that you were using to get PPP. Now, maybe you got it in the early days and there was some other calculation, but that's what it is. Now, there is an alternative I'm going to tell you about in a second, but if you got PPP based on line 31, that's your net on Schedule C or your net on Schedule F, then it's your net Schedule C divided by 12 times 2.5, period. That's it. And it's not payroll because it's just your net income from a self-employed tax return. And that's what the SBA says in their FAQs, clear as day in the section that I'm going to point you to. So again, the SBA is not wanting payroll forms from you, self-employed, because they don't exist. You're not an employee. It doesn't matter that you would write yourself a check and in the memo write payroll. It's not payroll. It's not. Now, it may feel like payroll. You can call it payroll all day long, but in the eyes of the IRS and in the eyes of the SBA, that is not payroll because payroll is only Form W-2. Now, when the banks say, I need your payroll forms, what you say is, well, I'm self-employed, so I'm giving you a Schedule C, and here's the IRS website and instructions, as well as the SBA and their FAQs to tell you that, bank, this is what I give you. This is where the calculation comes from. This is how you will determine my forgiveness. Now, a couple of things to note is that for the Schedule C, Schedule F filer, you get to use either 2019 or 2020, Schedule C or Schedule F, to determine your forgiveness, meaning you would get to use the higher of. So whatever Schedule C line 31 is in 2019 or whatever that Schedule C is line 31 in 2020, what one's higher, then that's the one you would use and turn in, and it'd be that line item divided by 12 times 2.5. Now, if you were one of the few that got PPP based on line 7, which is very few, this would have been those that hadn't gotten PPP before and got it about mid-March of 2021, potentially through when PPP ran out at the end of May of 21. So if you got PPP based on line 7, then when you go to file for PPP loan forgiveness, self-employed, you will use line 7 divided by 12 times 2.5. So the other thing is when you're filling out this form, whether it's directly with the bank or in their portal at the SBA, will ask for the SBA loan number. Well, that is going to be on the original documents that you received from the bank when you got PPP. It's not on the document that you submitted to the bank to request PPP, but it's going to be on the documents that were given to you at the time that you signed for and then received the PPP. And if you don't find it there, then you just ask the bank, because the bank will have it 100%. Same thing with, well, what is the loan number? Well, that's the loan number when you got the money, when you signed off on, in essence, the loan, until now it's going to be forgiven. Now, there's 3 numbers that you're putting on the Form 3508S. What was your PPP amount? Well, what did you get? That's your amount. That's your disbursement. There was no amount shaved off the top. How much did you get? That's your PPP amount. But do yourself a favor. Don't just go look at your bank statement and say, oh, there it is, because maybe you're going to misidentify it. Go and actually look at the documents that you signed when you got PPP to ensure that you put the right amount down as the PPP loan amount that you got. I'm sure it's the same as what actually deposited, but ensure for yourself. The second number that you put down is, well, how much do I want forgiven? And there's a third number, which is, well, what's your payroll? Well, the fact of the matter is that your payroll, okay, even though the SBA uses that terminology, is what I just told you. It's your Schedule C, line 31 divided by 12 times 2.5, if that's how you used the calculation to get your PPP. And you would use the higher of 19 or 20. It's the net on Schedule F divided by 12 times 2.5, the higher of 19 or 20. That's your payroll amount. I get it. It's like, well, JJ, you just told us that that is not payroll. So now you're telling us that we put it on the payroll line item? Yeah, go figure. But the thing to remember is that the definition of payroll to the SBA for the self-employed, the Schedule C, Schedule F filer, is not payroll as in W-2 wages, because you don't have any, right? You don't. But your payroll amount is simply that calculation. And here's the Schedule C. And the IRS will be able to communicate with the SBA. So the SBA is going to get that information. They'll be able to easily verify it. That's one of the reasons you don't have to provide any documentation, because the SBA is going to be able to get it instantaneously or whenever they request it to verify your calculation. So again, your payroll amount. Now, I said it at the beginning. This is for the self-employed Schedule C, Schedule F filer that doesn't pay any employees, has no employees that they pay W-2s to. So your payroll amount is that calculation. Now, again, if you got PPP and you would have known you were one of the lucky ones, and if you didn't know, you're going to be able to go back and figure out how did you determine the amount of your PPP. And reason I'm saying that is that if you did get PPP, it'd be about mid-March through the end of May, and you were using the calculation that was line 7 of Schedule C, then you will use that same line item to determine your payroll amount on your PPP loan forgiveness application. So it'd be line 12 divided by, line 7 divided by 12 times 2.5. Again, what's higher, 19 or 20? That's what you get to use. Now, the maximum that you could have got is $100,000. The maximum that you can get forgiven is $100,000. Okay, in terms of the dollar amount. And let me really make sure I'm being clear here. Okay, I don't mean $100,000 was your PPP loan amount. Okay, it may sound like that's what I said, but what I'm saying here is this: the maximum that can count towards the calculation is $100,000. So if your line 31 is $158,000, well, the maximum that's going to count is $100,000. But here's the thing: when you got PPP, it was based on line 31. So really, your loan should be the exact same amount as what you got, which then would be the same amount as your forgiveness. So for most, these 3 numbers that I'm talking to you about would be the same, because that third one is, well, what's the amount of forgiveness? So if $100,000 is the max that you can be including in your calculation, right? So the max that can count towards the loan, well, it's also $100,000 max even if you're using line 7. No, I'm not saying you got a $100,000 loan. What I'm saying is It's 100,000 max that you get to use of line 31 or line 7, depending on how you got it. You can use the higher of 2019 or 20. And then that is then how you calculate your forgiveness amount, because that's your payroll amount. So with that being said, don't be frustrated that that this might be complicated. Don't be frustrated that this might be confusing, because guess what? Okay, let's just go to reality here. Okay, you got money from the government for free. You don't have to pay it back, right? You got to use it in essence because you were in economic dire straits. So there's no reason to be frustrated about the process. Okay, and you have plenty of time to get your forgiveness, because you have your disbursement date plus 24 weeks plus 10 months to actually get your application in for forgiveness, because that's how long your loan payments would be deferred. Now, you can apply for forgiveness after that. It's just that you will have to start making payments. Once you do get it forgiven, you'll get that reimbursed to you. So really, if your Schedule C was actual, meaning it was done, and you go, well, here's my Schedule C, so here's my PPP loan amount, line 31 divided by 12 times 2.5, or line 7 divided by 12 times 2.5. Now, line 7 or line 31 can't be more than $100,000, meaning the max that you could get is $20,833, because 100,000 divided by 12 times 2.5 is 20,833. But when you did the calculation, if you based it on a Schedule C that is the same as what you filed with the IRS, and you're using the higher of, then the amount that you got is equal to your payroll amount, which is equal to your request for forgiveness amount. So those three numbers: how much did you get, how much do you want forgiven, and what's your payroll cost? Well, it's kind of should be an obvious. It's like, well, whatever I got, that's what I want forgiven. Well, the max that you can be forgiven is, for the self-employed, going to be your payroll number, okay? Because your calculation is just that. It's just a calculation. So when the bank comes to you and says, well, we need to see how you spend it, or give us an Excel spreadsheet, you just say, hey, I appreciate that that's what you're asking and that's what you think you need. But will you ask the SBA if they actually need that? Because I'm giving you a Schedule C and a Schedule F. And you don't even have to tell them per JJ the CPA, because I'm giving you the links that I just told you. And you can say per IRS and per SBA. I don't have payroll. I'm not an employee. I'm a self-employed individual. Doesn't matter what we call payroll. The SBA doesn't want to know what you spent the money on. They could care less. What they care about is what was on your Schedule C for self-employed, or on your Schedule F, self-employed farmers and ranchers. What was that form? Because that's all that matters. That's all that matters. Now, if your bank has elected to use the portal system where you're filing for forgiveness directly with the SBA, know this: the bank is still there to help you get through the process and answer your questions. If you're doing the forgiveness directly with your bank, well, the same thing. And then I'm going to tell you a little secret. The banks want this to be forgiven, because then they get their money. See, when the PPP came out, round 1, round 2, draw 1, draw 2, pick it, the banks fronted their own money. Thank you, banks. Now they want to get it back, and they don't get it back until that loan's forgiven. So whatever games the bank employee is playing with you, or making you feel bad, or threatening you, know that it's not the bank that's that employee that probably should get fired. Okay, shame on them. But what you need to know is that the bank is a conduit. That means the bank doesn't really decide anything. If you think about it, and in pure reality, it's the SBA that decides it. The bank could go, oh, yeah, we're going to forgive this. And the SBA goes, well, how? Just because you said we got to follow the rules, right? It's just like a game, a football game, baseball game, badminton, tennis, volleyball, piano, whatever. There are rules. There's a referee. Okay? That's the SBA. They're the rules setter. They're the ones that ensure that they get followed. All I'm saying on this is that with the banks, they want it to get forgiven. So any of this nonsense that you're hearing, well, if you don't do it by this time, and if you don't do this, and blah, 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 right? Just take a deep breath, put it aside, file for your forgiveness. It shouldn't take long, especially for the self-employed. Put the information in on there. The bank will answer your questions. And at the end of the day, it should go pretty simple for you. And just know this, though. Your max forgiveness will be whatever you actually filed with the IRS and then that calculation that I provided to you. So if you gave the bank a number that wasn't actually what got filed with the IRS, maybe because it was an estimate and you didn't have your tax return done, and if you got too much, then yes, you're going to have to pay that back. Meaning, if you told the bank you netted 100 grand, but your Schedule C only shows that you netted 50 grand, and you got it based on line 31, well, you got too much because it's going to go on what you actually filed. That's why all the SBA cares about, and therefore your bank should care about, is what is your Schedule C for 19 or 20, what's the higher one, and then use that. And this is the same whether you're doing PPP loan forgiveness that you got in 2020 or PPP loan forgiveness for an amount you got in 2021. Doesn't matter if it's round 1, round 2, PPP 1, PPP 2. These rules are the same and universal. All right, hey, hopefully that helps. Again, keep working through it. This was a good thing. I don't see any negative to it. And don't let the banks push you around. Not that they're going to, but don't let them, okay? Don't be losing sleep over this. Because the SBA has rules, you're required to follow them just the same as the bank, and the SBA is going to make sure that the bank does this all properly. All right, I'm just looking at my notes real quick, make sure that I covered everything I was hoping to cover here for you, and I believe that I did. So, hey, thanks for tuning in. I'd love it if you'd subscribe, and then don't you ever forget, you've never met a CPA quite like me. All right, have a great one.